Margaret Rutherford. I'm a psychologist in Fayetteville, Arkansas, and I love being here on the Mighty. I sure hope that it is not as hot and muggy where you are as where I am. It is really terrible out there. Today we're going to be talking about depression and how you manage your depression within your relationships, within your own relationship, like a marriage, with your parents, with your children, and with your friends. I think of depression as kind of an implosion of the self. So if you remember or can imagine or having seen a video of a building that they're going to blow up and destroy, and they put bombs all in it, and then instead of exploding, it implodes, right? Well, I think depression is a lot like an implosion of the self. And obviously it changes the relationships that you're in. It alters them, whether or not it's an acute depression or whether it's more chronic depression. But I want to hear from you. I have some ideas about what you can do, what works, what helps. But I really want to hear from you, because you're the ones who are out there having the courage to confront your own depression. I have my laptop here and I'll be able to see your questions and comments. A couple of months ago, I couldn't see them, and I basically sat and talked to myself for 30 minutes. It was bizarre. So we have rectified that, and now I have my laptop ready, and Ashley is ready at Mental Health on the Mighty to help me out. Thanks, Ashley. And I'll look forward to hearing from you. You know, I learned in graduate school quite a long time ago that the most important question after you ask someone, okay, they tell you they're suicidal, and then you say, do you have a plan? Obviously, that's most important to talk about. But then you ask them, who's your support system? Who have you got in your corner? And if they look at you and say, no one, then there's a huge problem. You've really got to take measures to help that person. So that's why we want to talk about, oops, my laptop went off. Oh, Lord. Best laid plans of mice and men, right? My grandmother used to say she could plan her work, but she couldn't work her plan. So let's hope this works. So anyway, that's what we're going to talk about today. And your support system, how you talk about it, about your depression with them, what works, what has not worked, what you'd like to share with other people that does not work, how you talk to your children about it. Anyway, let's get started. Let's first talk about your partner, your spouse. And I'll get to that comment. I see it coming in right now, and I'll get to it in just a second. Michael Yapko, who is an international expert on depression, talks a lot about how depression is contagious. He's written a book called Hand-Me-Down Blues, which is about this interesting dynamic that can happen in relationships and families, where one person gets depressed and it has this subtle or not so subtle effect on other people. So how do you talk about it in your relationship? Partners can easily feel pretty alienated because, of course, there's that implosion of depression, right? And so you're not necessarily reaching out to them like you did in the past, and it's hard for them not to take it personally. Let me check some comments. Hold on. Samantha, I have borderline personality, and in my personal relationships, especially my relationship with my mother and my girlfriend, they can be really hard, even when you know you have people. Your depression is screaming that you are alone. What an excellent point. That voice, that negative, critical voice inside your head is going, nobody wants to hear about your depression. Nobody wants to hear about your feelings. Just go get over yourself, or go in a room by yourself. Or you're so right, Samantha, you have to fight that irrationality of what that voice is telling you. That's really a great point. And of course it affects your relationships. So, because you've got this internal struggle of, I want to reach out, but then I feel so bad about myself, and I'm telling myself such negative messages. Why would anyone want to be in a relationship with me, even people who love me? Great point. Here we go. Mike, I'm fortunate that my boyfriend, friends, and family are there for me. They are what helps me if I have dark days. Wow, that is wonderful. And again, goes back to my subject of, that support system being so very helpful. I wonder if any of you have had a partner that got angry when you got depressed. I'll tell you a story in a second about a particular couple I worked with where that was very much the case. He didn't understand depression. It was the wife who was very depressed and had chronic depression, and he didn't understand it. Let me check another comment. Thanks so much for these comments. This is great. Kelly, trying to let your parents understand your depression, how to deal with it, how they can help. DBT has helped me talk to my family about what my depression is. We're going to talk about parents in just a second. Let's stick, if we can, right now to your partner. I'll tell you the story. This woman had seen me off and on, mostly off, but she came in every time her depression got the best of her. And she said, my husband just gets mad every time because he looks around and says, you don't have anything to be depressed about. And so he doesn't, the rational side of him does not understand, right? So I asked them to come in, and I looked at him and said, okay, let's do a little bit of visualization here. Let's imagine something together. What if you were given a house to live in, and it was fantastic? I mean, it had all these amenities and gorgeous oriental rugs all over everywhere, if you like orientals or whatever you want. I mean, it's a beautiful, beautiful home, and it's yours forever. And you can't buy it, you can't sell it. No, I mean, you can't sell it, nothing. You're stuck with it. But here's the one trick. Underneath all these rugs, the powers that be are going to put a hole. And the hole will move every time, every maybe week, every day, every month. You'll step on one of those gorgeous rugs and you will plummet into a hole. And you never know where the hole's going to be. And you could walk around for days, weeks, months, maybe even a year and not walk on a hole. Because it's a huge house, right? How do you think that would feel if you knew you had to live in that house? And what he said, obviously, was, well, it would scare me. I would be nervous all the time. I would be hypervigilant. I wouldn't know how to enjoy myself. And I said, that's the way someone with chronic depression feels. They never know how how they are going to react to a certain trigger. They don't know from day to day to day what possibly could lead them into that darkness and that hole. And he looked at me and he looked at her and he said, oh my gosh, I get it now. Let me check some of the comments. Hopefully that's helpful. How do I get my husband to understand my depression? He's always bringing me down. This is Che Peterson. Cole, my partner doesn't like me taking medication. He gets mad. He says I don't need it. He has no idea what we go through. Well, maybe that analogy I just used would be helpful. The whole medication thing, wow, that's kind of a toughie. Some people are dead set against it, and of course I have seen it make remarkable difference in someone. It's like seeing them emerge from this depression. I feel like I'm getting to know the person because they're on Trintellix or Prozac or what are some of the others? Well, anyway, you know them. You're on them. But because we can't see depression and because it's more hidden, they can't see the changes that medication help you with are not as visible sometimes, or there can just be a feeling that you should be able to do it yourself, that medication, you shouldn't have to take it. One of the things that you can say to them is you can try to educate them, give them literature that you've read, get them to read to listen to a podcast or read a blog post about it. So maybe they could try to understand it. And if it's not about you, if they're reading about someone else, maybe it would be easier for them to understand. Okay? I hope maybe that's helpful. Dahlia says, my partner does get angry when I'm upset. He doesn't understand. I'm bipolar 2, and he always says that I'm like a switch and it's too much. Then I'm being dramatic. Yeah. If I tell him I want to hurt myself to feel better, he says I'm acting like a 14-year-old. Yeah. self-destructive behavior like cutting or wanting to hurt yourself in some other way. I have a patient who sticks her hands in very hot water. Is really hard to understand. And there's something that might be helpful if you would Google "This Is My Brave" or "Stigma Fighters." Both of those websites are featuring stories of people just like you and me who are struggling with some sort of mental illness. And again, maybe if they begin to read what other people have said, and you say, this is something that I feel like doing sometimes. Maybe if it's not quite as in their face as it's about you, that would be helpful. Now, let's face it, hearing that your partner wants to hurt themselves is frightening. And so, depending on how your partner deals with fear, they may or may not be able to even express that just makes them feel so helpless and so afraid. I've got down here in my notes that, handling your medication responsibly if you're on it, letting your partner know that you're not just resigning yourself to these feelings, but that you're actively fighting them, being in therapy, going to a group, reading The Mighty, whatever helps you feel like you're working through it, where they have some hope that you're not just going to give into it and let it take over your whole existence. Our partners our lives are connected in so many different ways. We're financial partners, we're domestic partners, we're parenting partners, we're lovers, we're what else? Sometimes we're business partners. There's all kinds of things, and so when you're trying to talk to your partner about something, then he or she may go, well, how's that going to affect the money? Or are you not going to be able to parent? Or, does this mean we're never going to have intercourse? I mean, loss of libido is part of depression, right? So allowing them to know that, letting them see that you are trying to work through it, seeking help, seeking information for them. There's no easy answer. I wish there was. This is from Jealousy? Medina? I'm not sure. Jealousy? I don't know. What's your advice on having a toxic parent when you suffer from chronic depression and anxiety? My husband supports my relationships, but sees how having a relationship with my mom hurts me and my siblings. I'm grown, have kids of my own, and don't want to end up like her because of my mental illnesses. I finally found a support system that has helped me succeed. Finally, good. Well, okay. Let's switch into talking about parents. Parents. They may be a part of why you're depressed. Obviously, you may have trauma in your life. You may have abuse in your life. Again, I'll go back to Michael Yapko. He says that depression can be taught. You can model. You can model thinking, being negative, avoiding conflict, being irrational. What's another one? Oh, acting like a victim and focusing on the negative. All those things parents can actually model for their children. Now, it sounds like you're describing maybe having a mom with borderline personality disorder or a personality disorder that has been very toxic. That's kind of a different topic altogether. I'd be more than happy to talk about one of these days, having that amount of emotional instability in a parent. Maybe we can plan that for next time, in fact. Certainly, a response to that is frequently depression or anger or, sadly enough, sometimes becoming like that parent. I'm glad your husband's understanding, but maybe we can talk next time about how you can be with a very toxic parent but not be so involved in the actual vortex that is their darkness, right? Okay. Here we go. Family questions. How do I change a lifelong relationship with my parents that is heavily formed by my 15 years of constant battle with depression? I was diagnosed, 9? With 23, I'm still struggling. Wow. Kim, one of the things I had written to myself, this is from Kim Window, written to myself, is that sometimes when you struggle with depression, it can kind of tend to elongate your own childhood. You feel more like a child with your parents because you haven't necessarily been very successful at some of life's markers. You know, maybe you haven't been able to keep a job. Maybe you haven't been able to finish high school or college. Maybe you haven't, you know, there's some pragmatic things that are kind of our markers of when we're becoming adults, and we feel more like that as in our bodies, in our minds, in our hearts. And so yeah, that can be kind of damaging. And of course, parents, I wrote a post one time called what did I call it? It was when the empty nest, something about isn't empty anymore. when kids come back, you know, it's parents have a hard time if they're loving parents watching a child deal with depression and faltering. So hopefully they understand, Kim, the nature of chronic depression. Hopefully they have been there for you, but somehow or another beginning to say, you know, there are just some aspects of my life that I need to learn how to row my own boat. I know you're worried about me, but you know, I have to fix this. I have to get the right therapist. I have to be on the right medication. I have to exercise. I have to try to meditate. I have to do all those things that are, for me, what helps me stay stable. Parents and family can be incredibly important in that. I'm not saying that. The thing I said at the very first, who's your support system? Of course that's important, but maybe they're not quite ready to let you shoulder that responsibility. It scares them. Fear's hard. Kelly, trying to let your parents understand your depression is how to deal with it and how they can help. DBT has helped me. Oh, I just read this one before. DBT has helped me talk to my family what depression is. Yeah. I have taken just a seminar on DBT, and I know it can be extremely helpful. DBT is elegant in its simplicity, in the effort to try to hook up your brain with your emotions so that you don't let emotions just take over you and deal, and you're acting erratically and irrationally because it's all about you're upset or you've got to fix something or you have an emotion that's painful that you want to escape from or whatever it's about. So I do think it gives parents or people who love you a very concrete way of understanding what's going on and what's going to be helpful. They can maybe even help you with that by using some of the same DBT language. That's a really great idea. Thanks for that. Kimmy, I think it's hardest to convince my mom about my feelings. She makes me so in denial about my problem and didn't agree when I tried to get help. Wow, that's tough. You know, people who see that or consider seeking help as weakness. I've talked about this before, but maybe it bears repeating. I think of seeking help as getting consultation. I don't know how to. I'm remodeling our house. We're remodeling our house right now. I wouldn't know what in the heck to do. Wouldn't even know where to start. We have a contractor, right? We wouldn't try to remodel our own house unless we knew how to do that. Therapists, psychologists, social workers, LPCs, whomever. It sounds like you may be from Great Britain or the UK, because you call it mum. I know they also have a mental health system, but we look up to people for seeking consult in things that they don't do well, right? So how do we also look on mental health that way, that we are seeking help from someone who's seen hundreds of people over the years and has gotten specialized training so that we can use certain techniques or whatever. So maybe if you explain it to her that way, I'm sure she has used, maybe she has a massage therapist, maybe she has somebody paint her house, maybe whatever, but she would understand seeking help for something that you don't have any experience with. Maybe kind of a practical way of looking at it would help. Okay, I'm going to do one more parent question, and then we'll move on to children. Faith, it took me 7 years to get my point across that I was depressed. I deal with that and anxiety. My mother doesn't understand it fully, but she's trying. Good for her. She's always reminding me that she's trying the best she can to help me. You're right, though. It is something I need to personally fix. Oh, that sounds. I mean, I'm not laughing at you or your mom, but that when you say she constantly reminds me that she's trying to understand, that's pretty amusing. Well, good for her. Uh, my own grandmother, when I decided to become a therapist, and I mean, she was 60 years older than me, looked at me and she said, "Well, why? I think therapy's for weak people. What, you got to sit around and listen to people whine?" And I looked at her and I said, no, you got this wrong. Therapy is for people who are willing and ready to look at themselves very objectively and receive someone else's feedback in a loving, loving, caring relationship. And so that can be very helpful for someone if they're, and it takes a lot of strength and courage to look at yourself that objectively. So, it might be interesting to take your mother to, if you're in therapy, to take your mother to a session, so she could sort of experience it, just how nervous you can get when you're in front of a therapist and they're sort of looking at you, and maybe that would help your mother understand. All right, let's go on to kids, okay? I'll take a couple of questions. Yeah, I don't have any kids. The fear of what happened to me happening to them has stopped me from trying. Well, Jillian, I'm so sorry. That sounds like you were abused or had some kind of trauma in your life as a child. And so that, of course, is something you don't want anyone you love to have happen to them. I often tell my patients that it's like when you've had trauma, you have to build a wall against the fear of that happening to you again, to someone you love again. And yet that wall can't be what it was before. I mean, if someone came in my front door right now and shot me, I obviously would have trouble being in this room alone, and would have to get over that. But I eventually, if I was going to work anymore, I would have to build that wall, right? But what I say metaphorically is that in some ways it could be made of different material. Whereas before I thought it was solid and I couldn't see through it and I was safe, because we all do that because it helps us stay sane to think we know what's going to happen in the next minute. When you don't, and when you've had that as your reality, I hate that your fear is still governing you. Maybe somewhere, I don't know if you could work with a therapist, or maybe if it was sexual abuse, The Courage to Heal is a wonderful manual. But somehow build back enough safety where your choices, you may or may not ever decide to have children. That's certainly your choice. But your fear wouldn't be governing that. Okay, let's talk. I want to say one thing about kids myself. Kids, you're like Yapko says, you're modeling things for them. I love this Dove commercial. Now, it's not about depression. It's about body image. But Dove did a study where they talked to mothers and daughters, and they separated them, and they talked to the mothers about how they viewed their bodies, what they liked, what they didn't like. Let's say she didn't like her nose, or she thought her knees were knobby or something. But the mother would say very distinctly, but I've never said anything like that to my daughter. I've always said very complimentary things to her about her body. Well, the daughters were in another room writing what they liked and what they didn't like about their bodies. Guess what? The mothers had tears in their eyes when they realized the mom who didn't like her nose had a daughter who didn't like her nose. The mom who didn't like her knobby knees had a daughter who didn't like her knobby knees. The point of that study is it's not what you say to them, it's what you say to yourself, and how they hear you, literally and figuratively, talking to yourself. And if you have to fight in depression, of course, that very negative viewpoint of yourself, and your children can pick that up without you realizing it. So you have to be careful. So another thing is how, and maybe some of you could write about this, have your children been a distraction for you from your depression, or have they been helpful to you? Do they bring you the joy that you have to struggle to feel in yourself? I'd love for somebody to answer that question, probably both ways, actually. And then, but if it's the first way, how do you handle, well, really either way, how do you handle them leaving when it's time for them to be launched and have their own lives? Does that scare you? let me get back to the questions. Rihanna, my sons are bloody awesome on my down days. They are aged 4, 3, 2, 1, and they will know from the moment they wake up if mom's feeling sad, as they call it. They immediately set to work trying to make me happy again, whether it be all cuddling up with me on the sofa or drawing me pictures, making me things. They truly are amazing little humans. If they are doing, Rihanna, I think it's wonderful. First of all, I think it's wonderful that you're talking to your kids about what depression is, and that sometimes mommy feels sad, and it has absolutely nothing to do with them, right? So the fact that they understand that, I've had so many people through the years say, if someone had just told me that what was wrong with my mom or what was wrong with my dad had a name, I wouldn't have obsessed about it as much. I would have realized it, at least hopefully, that it wasn't about me, but so often it's not explained. Mom just goes away for 3 weeks, or dad is out in the barn or the garage and stays there for hours on end, and nothing is ever said to the kids. So I'm glad you've been open and honest with them. I do think you have to be careful that you're not either, probably unintentionally, giving your kids the message that it's their job to save you, okay? You do have to be careful about that. I just wanted to bring that to your awareness because, I write a lot about perfectly hidden depression, which I've never even told you my website. It's drmargaretrutherford.com, but I do a lot of work with hidden depression, what I call perfectly hidden depression. And one of the ways you can become perfectly hidden but yet depressed is to feel like you're caring for a parent that can't care for themselves. So just be careful. Thanks for writing. It's a great comment. Kid questions. Oh my God, my 2 kids moving to college at the same time. I'm so scared. I'm so sad. I feel my life is over. This is from Josie. Well, let me just share with you, Josie, that the day after I took my son to college, I was out in my driveway in his car, which he had left, sobbing and screaming at the top of my voice, I've changed my mind. You have to come back. And then I saw a neighbor walking by, and I felt so stupid that I went in and went to a movie, so got my mind off of it. But empty nest, and he was my only son, empty nest can be tough, and especially if you struggle with depression. In fact, it was what initially made me think about this particular Facebook Live episode because I've done a lot of writing about empty nest. But it's not going to kill you. You almost get accustomed to some of the quiet, although that youthful energy being gone feels really, really odd. Hopefully, if you have a partner, or if you don't, or have just really good friendships, then you can move on, and those will be helpful to you. You can find things to do that you really couldn't do with kids, which is kind of nice. I actually started blogging when my son left for college, and it has turned into its own thing. So maybe that will be helpful. Okay, take one more kid question. Okay, let's see everybody. Haley, I have 2 kids, a 2-year-old and a 7-month-old, and I've been diagnosed with depression since my first baby. So the thought of having another baby was my getaway from depression? I don't quite understand that. So me and my husband have been trying, and I've been depressed and have anxiety. We found out I'm expecting again, and all I can think about is how and why did I even attempt to try when I'm going to worry about this or that. Please help. Okay, so as I understand the question, you had postpartum depression after your 2-year-old, then you had a 7-month-old, and now whoa, your life, you're going to be busy. I had a patient several years ago now who had obsessive compulsive disorder and depression, and she had managed to have 2 children, although I had seen her when she was having the second because she was really worried. And she actually came in suicidal when she was pregnant for the 3rd time. She said, I can't do it. And what we talked about was how she was doing it. There was a lot of perfectionism in how she was viewing parenting. if you've been depressed, and you've been parenting children, one, that's kudos to you, but it sounds like maybe you need to get at the root of what the problem is. It may be a lingering postpartum depression that with all the... Now, I'm not a medical doctor, I'm a psychologist, so we've got to be careful here. But, I would check with my OBGYN and talk about hormonal changes, get your thyroid checked. There are all kinds of things that can mimic depression. But if it's a sense of responsibility that's wearing you down, maybe it'd be helpful to think, okay, am I overloading myself? I mean, I'm already going to have 3 children under the age of 4, I guess. So that's tough enough in itself. Maybe you need help. Maybe there's some pragmatic things to look at. Good luck to you. Okay, let's move to friends. When I thought about relationships with friends, I thought, I have a friend, a very good friend, who has bipolar disorder. And I certainly watched the pattern over and over again of her getting pretty hypomanic and then getting very depressed, and I wouldn't hear from her for weeks. And I got to where I wouldn't be really pushy. I mean, that would be rude, but I'd be a little pushy when she got depressed because I was concerned about her, actually. And so I'd let her know in little bitty pieces how, little tidbits. We didn't have texting back when she was living here, but I would let her know I was thinking about her. I would leave flowers for her. I would do things for her. Friends, I think, can be somewhat more objective than family because, again, they have probably one connection to us, maybe 2, but not as many connections as we have with family. We're not as interwoven. So friends can be a little more objective, and I think friends are vital. And again, you have to fight that implosion. You have to fight I'm so sorry I've forgotten your name, but made the great point at the very beginning. You have to fight that negative voice in your head that no one would want to be with me anyway because I'm depressed. That's just not true. And all of a sudden, all my questions went away. I don't know what's going on there. Maybe you erased them. But anyway, I fight for your friendships. They're the people that are going to help you with your depression the most consistently, I think, in many ways. And they're going to maybe be a little more honest with you about if they see you're giving up or you're resigning yourself or you're struggling. They also help you. They'll help you with your kids. They'll help you with your chores. They'll help you with all kinds of things when you're going through a hard time. So try not to abandon your friendships and don't listen to that negative voice, okay? I have some friend questions are coming in. Good, that's great. Thank you all so much for being here. While we're waiting for this, let me give you some things about me. I do have a website, drmargaretrutherford.com. I have a Facebook page that goes with that. It's facebook.com/drmargaretrutherford. I've also started a podcast, which I'm real excited about. It's doing well, I think. It's called Self-Work with Dr. Margaret Rutherford. And I talk about lots of different things. I've always had a kind of a generalized practice, so I'm talking about anxiety, I'm talking about depression, I'm talking about relationship issues, how to build trust, facing change, and I talk a lot about depression and perfectly hidden depression. So maybe you'll check out Self-Work with Dr. Margaret Rutherford. That's on iTunes, Stitcher, wherever. Jennifer Reed. I have a friend neighbor with bipolar and it's been very helpful to both of us. I suffer with major depressive disorder and generalized anxiety disorder. Just sit and talk about our journeys. I'm grateful for our friendship. That's wonderful. Yeah, and again, repeating myself, I guess, because the relationship is simpler, it's easier for her to hear, oh yeah, I had thoughts of driving off the road and not freaking out about it, whereas your mother or your husband would go, what? And so that's so important. And seeking people who have experienced the same thing as you have are also, that's really great. So good for you. That's kind of your own little support group. That's great. When you don't have friends, what do you do? Sandra, I had a college student come one time to therapy, and she said, and the University of Arkansas is here, and it's huge, and she said, there isn't anybody here who's interested in being my friend. Well, in another 4 or 5 months, she couldn't wait to come back to school because she had made friends. And what I told her was what I learned in Girl Scouts years ago. And I don't mean to make fun of loneliness or discount it. I think loneliness is terrible. It should perhaps be its own mental illness diagnosis. But you can try to be a friend. You can look for somebody who, if you go to the grocery store, if you go to the park, if you go anywhere, you can look for somebody who looks like they're struggling. And you can try to help them. You can try to be a friend. If you're a friend, how do you make friends? You are a friend. And so, yes, does it take some assertiveness to do that? You betcha. There was a psychological theory called the as-if theory quite a while ago. And as-if people, or the therapeutic technique is to say, if you felt better about yourself, what would you be doing? And the answer might be, well, I would stand up. I would sit up more, what's the word I'm looking for? I would sit up. I would walk differently. I would walk with more assertiveness. I would, my laptop's doing something stupid again. I would, my vocal tone would be a little stronger. You watch people who are assertive and you mimic what they do. So you kind of act as if, and then you can, okay, let me get rid of this now. You can better at least see if there's somebody in your world, just one person in your world that you could connect with. Also, going to support groups is very helpful. One more. Sometimes we have to be our own best friend. This is from Robin. Boy, is that ever true. One of the things that there was a book a long time ago called How to Be Your Own Best Friend, and at the time I was on my second divorce, and I needed a friend, and I had a lot of shame and disappointment in myself. So I read that book, and it was a really good reminder of what we say to other people to give them support is something we need to do for ourselves. I will do my best later this afternoon or tonight to get on to Mental Health on the Mighty's Facebook page and answer some of these questions I haven't been able to get to. I want to thank you all for being here today. You really helped me come up. I thought there were some great ideas, and I appreciate your willingness to share your own stories. Again, I will do my best to answer whatever questions I can. I may run out of time. I'm not sure how many people have actually responded, but I appreciate you being here. I'll be back on Mental Health on the Mighty next month. Maybe we'll be talking about unstable parents. Now, it sounds like that would be a helpful topic, right? Because I do have some ideas about that have worked for some of the patients I've been honored to work with. So again, I'm Dr. Margaret Rutherford, drmargaretrutherford.com, or Self-Work with Dr. Margaret Rutherford. It's hard to say. Self-Work with Dr. Margaret Rutherford. There you go. That's my new podcast, and I'd love to have you listen in. Thanks so much, and thanks, Ashley. I appreciate it. Bye for now.